Hey, you guys, this is Christy Young and Larry Young, and this podcast episode is meant to follow Larry's adoption story in the previous episode. If you've missed it, you've got to go check it out, but in the event you've missed it, we're going to do a quick 2-minute recap so that you have a high-level overview of the facts of his adoption, so that we're kind of doing a Q&A with him now, and so that it'll be relevant so that you'll understand. We want you to just hear the quick facts of his adoption story.
All right, quick story. So I found out I was adopted at the age of 22. I was adopted at birth by both my parents, who had very little, but had a lot of, very little materially, but a lot of love.
A ton of love.
And a ton of love in the whole family. And so my story is just really about God's faithfulness in that. And I didn't know I was adopted until 22. I was actually told by my biological brother. Found out I also have a biological sister. And God has just been so faithful in that. Mm-hmm. And so I hope that you do go back and you listen to it, because I think it's really impactful. It definitely was impactful for my life. And I hope it's encouraging for you and your family.
And then some quick facts. So his dad was a janitor. And
your adoptive
dad was a janitor, and he worked several jobs. He worked
as a forklift driver at a company that was called Foot and Davy down in Doraville, Georgia. And then he also worked as a porter at Jerry Brown Chevrolet. And then he also worked at Kroger at night, like stocking shelves. So my dad had a lot of jobs. I mean, at any given time, he probably, at the most, he had 3 jobs.
Okay, so he worked hard and a lot, and then he graduated high school at...
Graduated high school and
18?
Buford High School. Oh, my dad.
Your dad.
Oh, my dad was almost 20 years old when he graduated high school. They almost kind of kicked him out because he kind of was going to age out. My mother, she was not educated very well. Like, she left school in the 8th grade to just really, I think, stay and care for my grandfather, who would have been, let's say, he was born in 1900, so he would have been in his early 60s at that time. He died in 1993, actually the age of 93. And so she didn't have the best education.
Okay, so I just got to stand in the wings for a minute while Larry shared God's story. Yes, I'm coughing. I'm totally sick, and I had to go get cough drops, and I hate cough drops. They're so gross. But it stopped me from coughing. So anyway, but I had 4 follow-up questions to Larry, and he doesn't know that I'm going to ask these questions, so we get to see just off the cuff how he would respond. And then here's the deal. So he has, on his biological side, he has a white bio mama. He has a brother who, his name's Brandon, who's so sweet, who's biracial. Yep. He has a sister who is white.
Yep, she's all white.
So that's his biological side. On his adoptive side, he has 2 sweet black parents who are 5 foot 2.
They're like 5'4".
5 feet 2. They're so cute and so sweet. Short. And so he's 6'3" and biracial, but all of those facts are relevant for the questions that follow, and really to put on display God's faithfulness. His brother, his biracial brother, was raised by a white family, and then he is biracial, raised by a black family, but only 10 minutes away from each other.
Yeah.
And then, so could you kick us off with this? What was it, so as an adult now, as you look back on your brother being raised by a white sweet family, country family, and then you being raised in the city with
I was not raised in the city.
Well,
I was raised in Buford.
Suburbs.
Yeah, I was raised in the suburbs of
Buford,
thoughts? Georgia. Yeah. So, yeah, it was so funny because we're still so much alike. Mm-hmm. I think I'm still the louder one out of him. He's more quiet, reserved.
He would agree.
Yeah. And but one thing, we just are so similar. We're so much alike. And so I don't think our childhood was that different. You know, for a time he grew up kind of down the street from me. But I do think we had different experiences, like him, you know, going to family events, and primarily a white family. And me, I grew up like going to black family reunions, you know, and my identity was in that. Being a black man, you know, raised in Buford, Georgia. And so I think when we came together, though, it was like, it was almost like, because we grew up kind of in the same area, it wasn't that big of an issue or difference. Mm-hmm. And so I think it was like a lot more similar than it was different, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, and the same goes for a lot of my friends. Like, I'm thinking of my friend Joey. He grew up in a nicer neighborhood, right, than mine. I grew up, on the other side of Buford. And at the time, it wasn't great. There was some, you had somebody who's doing some bootlegging down the street. There was some prostitution going on and things like that. But yet, I think in the community, our experiences were so similar and like relatable, because I think there was a bondness, a closeness. And as kids, we just didn't think about it that much, right? But then when we look back and I reflect, I'm like, oh my gosh, like this was right down the street from me. And thank God that my friend, Joey, did not live down the street from that, and that he lived away from it. But yet we were still buddies and we were still friends,
So the thing we all want to know is, do y'all have the same taste in music?
No. Like, but it's funny because my brother and I, when we found out that we were brothers, it was so funny because he would give me CDs of like Counting Crows, right? And I'm like, what is this? Like, he's like, man, just listen to it. And he kept giving me CDs. But then I would listen to some songs. I'm like, oh, wow, I've heard that before.
Yes.
But I had no idea who wrote these songs. And me, I'm like in the hip hop, that was my jam. And R&B, like early 90s R&B, like it's obscure now. Like I think I was at an event at work and somebody played SWV. And I was like, oh, they played Sisters with Voices? And like nobody knew, but like I had another coworker who I knew she knew. And I was like, you know who that is? So, but like my brother, he would have no idea. He'd be like, what is that? But we, again, our taste in music's way different. But again, we're so much alike where he could easily pick it up and but he loves some DMX. That was his hip hop, is DMX, It's okay. Like, he was great.
Okay, this is the second question. I love, one of the incredible things I feel like about your testimony is God's faithfulness to you, despite having your parents always couldn't help you with homework. Your parents, and at some point, and then I don't know if you mentioned this in your testimony, but you wrestled with a little bit of dyslexia, where you would mix words up, and I
still
remember
do.
One time, I don't know if you want to share this, but one time, all of the kids in his elementary school growing up were all the colored kids, were in special education.
Yeah, a lot of us were.
And so that felt very like inequitable. But this is my question for you. You have had a lot of barriers educationally, and yet God has been so faithful to you to allow you to, to become an attorney and to be an attorney at a great company. And I know you feel incredibly grateful, but to anyone who'd be listening who has a child that's struggling in school, or if there's a child listening who would struggle in school, what would be your encouragement to them?
Yeah, I would say, having particularly two parents who couldn't help me as much. One is, just because they couldn't help me didn't mean that they didn't point me in directions to get help. And like the story of the Thatcher from A Knight's Tale, they did what they could. And so my parents would call the school and say, hey, he's having trouble. Can I drop him off to your house? Like, I'll do whatever I need to do to get my child the help. And I'll never forget my mom calling a teacher saying, he doesn't get this. Can you help? And I remember thinking my mom felt so helpless, because she's thinking, this is 6th grade math. And I had a math teacher. Her name was Miss Joy Bryant. Miss Joy Bryant, if you were listening to this, thank you.
We praise God for you.
If you are one of her children, or relative, or fellow teacher, I just want to say thank you for all the teachers that I had. I think they were all wonderful growing up. Miss Joy Gower was amazing, and they would just take extra time with me if I needed the help. But I thank God for my mom, because as a parent of a kid who had struggles, don't feel helpless, but rather do what you can. And I'll never forget my dad instilled this thing in me where, I was not the smartest kid, but I remember thinking, like, I will not let anybody outwork me, right? Like, I refuse to do that.
That's what I had in my notes. You will not outwork me. Because if you hear him, he tells our kids all the time, I was never the smartest kid in the class. I was never the smartest kid in the school, but no one will outwork me.
No, I will.
And being married to him for 20 years almost, you guys, that is exactly who he is.
Yeah, I like, even in law school, at Morehouse, I'll never forget Friday nights was a work night for me. And I think growing up watching my dad go to work, at 10 o'clock at night, and then he'd come home, get like an hour or two of sleep, get up, and then he'd go right back into work at the school, or he was working at a place called Jerry Brown Chevrolet as a porter. He just had so many jobs, and like, he just had the grit. Like, he and my mom would just work. And I think that diligence in some crazy way transferred over to me, and I would see them and I'm like, okay, well, I can work, right? I might not be smart, but I'll work, and I'll try to figure it out. Yeah. And even at Morehouse, like I said, on Friday nights, I remember, I'll never forget, there was a guy, he was going out, a group of guys, and I'm sitting there with one of my best friends. His name was Josh, and Lord rest his soul. He was a wonderful friend, and it was a Friday night. We're preparing for a big math test, and these group of guys say, hey, y'all got us on Sunday? And Josh and I were like, nope, but you can come right now. We're going to be here until about 1 a.m., and then we're going to wake up again at 8 a.m. and work half the day, and then we'll go to the movies tomorrow night, right? And I just remember I would do the work. And so if you're a kid listening to this, if you have learning disabilities, I want to tell you, as an attorney that struggles with dyslexia, I am a contract attorney, and I read contracts all day.
All day.
I draft contracts all day. I think about them. I want to tell you that, one, God is faithful and He's kind. I was reading Proverbs that talks about being diligent, right? And I would just encourage you, be diligent, and don't be afraid of the work, and don't be overwhelmed with it, but find joy in work. Work is a good thing. And even in law school, I remember Christy and I, we would be studying, like we'd start studying at, the afternoon, and next thing you know, it's 3 a.m. and we're still going. And I just really believe that, one, parent, do what you can. And one, first of all, pray for your child. Above all, right? Pray for your child. Secondly, do what you can. And then for you, child, work hard. And you will never regret working hard toward your goal. And if it doesn't make sense, seek the help that you need. I promise you there will be people there who are eager to help you.
Okay, that's so good. Okay, the third question, and y'all, there's just the third and the fourth question, then we're done. So the third question, it kind of relates to adoption. So you were a mixed kid raised by Black parents.
I didn't know I was mixed.
Okay.
I had no clue.
And his mom was so cute, y'all. She's so sweet. She gave several reasons he could have been, mixed and raised in their family. Anyway, she was so cute. But
doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. He was so dearly loved. What would you say to kids who may be a different color than their parents or siblings? Because I know you've spoken life into this, for kids who are adopted, or kids who, through any of life's crazy circumstances or beautiful circumstances, could feel sometimes like an odd man out even within their family, even if they know they're loved, even if they know they are cherished. And could you, because you were raised in that situation a little bit, and I know people at Morehouse gave you some of them.
Oh, they gave
give
me
you a hard time.
Boy.
Well, so could you speak life to someone who might be wrestling with it, or an adult who has a child that's wrestling with the same thing?
Yeah. So I think growing up, the biggest thing I remember from my childhood is I was so loved. I never felt fearful. I remember going over my aunt's house, both of them, and just never feeling out of place. I think, if anything, being an adopted child, they all knew, but I didn't know, and nobody made me feel different. I remember having older cousins who would just like, I'd show up at the reunion. It was like, Junior's here. And they would all be fighting on who's going to push me. And it was just like an overwhelming love. You know what I mean? Like, and just, it was truly like this family who, again, we weren't perfect. We were messed up, right? Like every family, we had issues. We had, people going to jail. We had people, alcohol issues, drug issues, whatever. But like God used this imperfect family to give me a glimmer of his perfect love. However messed up, right? I'll never forget that. And I think so often about that and how they easily could have called me out, called me different. One of my cousins could have easily said something. And if you guys are listening to this, I want to tell you thank you. And you know who you are. Just making me feel grafted in. And that's the best thing you can do for a child is don't treat them any differently. My parents whooped my butt just like anybody else's child, right? And they had expectations of me. And I remember there were a few moments where I did feel different that I'm like, man, especially when I hit 9 and I was already taller than both my parents at 9 and I towered over my dad.
Tell them, how tall are your parents?
My mom and dad are like 5'4", 5'5".
Okay, and
I'm
6'3".
And I was taller than them when I was like 9 years old. But when I was 9, I was a freak of nature, right? Like, I think I was 160 pounds. I was 5'7", 5'8". I was a big kid, right? And I played football, and but I remember feeling that some of those moments every now and then would creep in. But my mom would say, "Well, look at your uncle Grady. He was a big, light-skinned dude." And I thought, well, okay, cool. And I would just move on. But I think, as a kid, I never felt that different, right? I just knew that I was loved. And for any kid out there, if you have a child who you've adopted who looks different, we have children. Our biological all biological kids all look different.
They all look different.
One looks like me. 2 of them look like me. One looks like a brown version of you. My son came out, blonde hair, blue eyes, and I'm like, okay, I don't know where he came from.
He said, "Are you sure this is mine?" Yeah, I was like, "You've got to be kidding me."
It was weird. Yes, and then I said, "Oh, it'd be funny if we had a redhead." And then Evie came out, like she had a hue of like auburn hair, and I'm like, oh my gosh, my kids look like Skittles, like a pack of Skittles. That's what it all looks like. And now we have Jay.
So we've adopted a chocolate chip.
Yeah, my little, I love my little chocolate baby, but the beauty of it is that I can identify with her, right? And being in our family, there's so many different shades. I hope that she doesn't think about it. When she sees my parents, she has, black grandparents, and I hope that, they live to see her grow up, even just until she's 10 or whatever. Like, Lord, I hope that's the case. But I really, truly hope, one, that she feels loved and cared for just like any other child in our family. And I also think, too, if you're a teenager or a kid who's been adopted and you're struggling with this identity, I want to say your identity doesn't rest in your ethnicity or your color. My hope is that your identity rests in Christ, and your family is the people who care and come around you and love you.
Well, and then what's hard is we live in a culture that is so preoccupied by skin color or socioeconomic status or
sexual identity.
Yes, all these things.
Yeah.
But biblically, scripturally, that's not where our identity rests.
No. And I will say this a lot. People at our church, brothers and sisters, I call them brother and sister, and I mean that in a spiritual sense, is because they are my brothers and sisters. I have brothers and sisters in Birmingham, Houston, Texas, here in Columbus, all across the world. And I think my identity truly rests there. And this no secret. I still don't know who my biological father is. I have no clue. But I don't care that much. And it's not because I'm apathetic, but it's because I've been fulfilled. One, I had an earthly father who filled in that role very well, right? I have a dad. Like, Larry Young Sr. is my daddy, period. He'll be my daddy always. But I also have a heavenly Father who just blew that out of the water. And I don't have a longing for this fatherly kind of influence, because I'm like, I have the ultimate Father. I have the Father who created all things, knows all things, is all places at one. Why would I want something more?
Yes, and he loved you, crafted you together, made you all of who you
Wrote
are. In
my
fact,
story.
put you into the very family that you were given to. And
yes. What else do I want?
Okay, last question, you guys. How are you not bitter? How are you not angry when you were told that you were adopted and you were 22? Didn't you? People might be wondering, so I'm going to ask this as if it's being asked from the audience. How are you not frustrated your adopted parents didn't tell you that you were adopted? How are you not frustrated and bitter at your brother for not telling you all those years you were raised? I mean, you grew up in the same community. He never told you. And how are you not bitter, and were you not bitter at your biological mom?
Yeah.
How have you been able to wrestle with all this and now be on this side of it where you're bringing God glory? You see that the Lord has crafted together your situation, and you don't rest in angerness and bitter. And what would you say to someone who is still right now caught up in their flesh and is angry or mad?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I first want to say is people who find out they've been adopted later in life. Number one, I hope that your experience with your adopted parents has been one where you did feel loved and cared for. I hope it's one where you look back on your life and you see the benefit that God has given you by placing you in the family with those people. I have not met many people who found out they were adopted later in life. And again, I'm not saying they're not out there, but I haven't met many who did not feel wanted or desired by their adoptive family. I've had several friends one friend in particular comes to my mind. He always knew he was adopted, and his parents would pour themselves into, everything for him, right? And yet he still had this deep desire to want to be with his biological family. And there were some consequences to that. For me, I'm not bitter because, one, I think God's timing's amazing.
I do too.
When I found out I was adopted, I had just come into the faith and I was brand new. And so I had this picture of adoption already in my mind from how God adopts us into his family. And I couldn't help but to think about the parallel of I was a child who was brought into a family by no effort or no work of my own, but rather I was plucked up and put into this family. And from the outside, it looked completely imperfect, right? The world would say they don't have enough money, their home's not big enough, they have issues, but yet God used that and he made something which I hope is a beautiful story out of it. And I hope that people who may be struggling with their identity and saying like, man, I was adopted, I'm bitter, that you would focus on those aspects of it. And the reality is that you were wanted. So I want to say I'm not bitter because I have nothing to be bitter about. I have nothing to be angry about. And in fact, I really admire my brother for being respectful, because my parents, it was their wish to not tell me for so long. I think they had mentioned to Vicky, my birth mom, like, we're going to tell them at 9. Well, they didn't tell me. We're going to tell them at 12. They didn't tell me. We're going to tell them at 16. They didn't tell me. We'll tell them when he graduates high school. They didn't tell me. We'll tell them when he graduates college. They didn't tell me. And I think my brother tried really hard to honor that. And I didn't say this in the story, but my grandmother was sick. She had a stroke, and things weren't looking good. And Brandon wanted me to know
my biological
grandmother. He wanted me to know. I knew who she was. We call her Mama Net. I knew who she was. I'd seen her come to my house, many times as a kid. But I didn't know her as my grandmother. And I thank God that Brandon gave me that information so I actually could have a time to enjoy my biological grandmother before she passed away. And that meant a lot to me. And so, do I have anything to be bitter about? No, I don't. The thing that does sometimes, if I'm completely transparent, which I have been this whole time, is there are times where I know I missed out, right? I missed out on my sister and my brother growing up. There were times as an only child I felt very lonely. Mm-hmm. But God did give me my boy Elliot right down the street. So Elliot was like, we were like brothers. Like, I was always at his house. He was at my house. Mm-hmm. Brandon wasn't far. You know, I have my Joey. Like, all these good friends that God gave me. But there are times like when I, like, especially at family reunions, and I see, you know, Brandon and the family and like them interacting together, and they talk about stories as kids. Like, there is a longing there, right? There's a longing, because not that I missed moments
and
like
natural,
that.
And you're human.
Yeah. It's not that I miss moments like that, but it's a longing that, man, I wish I had had that experience with them. Mm-hmm. You know, if that makes sense. Like, I have a cousin, Justin, and like, it would have been cool to have grown up and spent more time with Justin and Nate and like all my other cousins, and just kind of really had those experiences with them. And I think it would have been good for me. But it's okay, you know, in God's timing, he worked this out the way he did. And so, like I said, I'd focus more on the fact that, one, God saw fit to bring you out of a situation and to put you in a situation with a family who loves and cares for you. Just like I've been adopted from death into life. It is a beautiful picture. So, that's it.
Is there anything else you'd want to add? Any thoughts?
I just really want to add that I hope this story, again, this is not so much about me, but I hope that people feel encouraged to do something. Like I said at the end, telling my story, that my parents didn't have much. So the last thing I'll say, though, is I'm just overwhelmed at their compassion for the orphan. And even though they had very little in terms of material standpoint, they had a desire to love a child. And I think too often, particularly in our culture, we put too much emphasis on, well, I don't have the means, rather than you having the desire. If you have the desire and you're being obedient to God's calling to love the orphan and the widowed, God will provide the means. Mm. And that's what I hope people hear. You don't need to have it all together, because you won't, but you need to know that you serve a great God who will put everything together that you need and weave it into the story of the life of a child or someone who's in need that you should be caring for. And I don't think it's optional. And I think that I don't mean to say that everybody needs to foster or adopt. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that, do you know a foster or adoptive family you can come around? But we just watched the movie Sound of Hope.
Oh, y'all, it was so good.
And here you had this rural church, and they were in the country. They didn't have a lot.
No.
They ended up adopting, 70 kids?
77 kids.
77.
22 families adopted 77 kids.
22 families. Like, small little church.
So there was not a child who needed to be fostered or adopted, I think, within a 100-mile radius of the city of Possum Trot.
What are we doing? What are we doing? You know, like, what are we doing? You know, like, I look at my parents. They weren't part of a church. They didn't have a whole lot, but they took in a kid. Church, that should burn your soul that these two people did that. And I'm not trying to say that as a point of condemnation, but rather I hope it burns some conviction. So there's 400,000 churches in the U.S. reportedly, and you have 100,000 foster children in the U.S.
who need to be adopted, right? Are those just the ones that need to be adopted?
I don't know. I can't recall. But anyways, I recall the statistic. Go watch the movie. They have the statistic there.
Yes, they do.
But I just remember that number blew me away. And I remember thinking, wow.
Because it's really small.
It's a small number relative to the number of churches. And again, I don't know, of like healthy churches, like what they look like, or, I hope the cults were not considered in that number. But still, even if you had every healthy church, right, come around one foster family and support them, there would be no need for foster care in the U.S. It would eliminate itself. And so I just think as the church, we can't just turn a blind eye to it. And my hope is that, again, there were two people who were, my parents were refused actually the opportunity to adopt several times because they were told by the state that, hey, you don't have enough money. I don't know if you guys have the capacity to do it.
Do you want to share, like, how much did your parents make as a household income-ish when you were
When I graduated high school, I remember, and shout out again to Buford High School, because one of the, I remember as a senior class, and one of the teachers, Dr. Kauser, taught us how to do our income taxes. And I started doing my parents' income taxes. And I'll never forget, my parents made less than $40,000 my senior year. I think it was like something like $28,000 or something like that. And I remember thinking, like, I was like, in my head, I thought that was a good amount of money. I'm like, man, they're making a nice chunk of change. That was my perspective, right? But I think so often we get caught up in that. And again, the state denied them the opportunity to foster and adopt. And I couldn't imagine being raised in a better home.
Well, and the thing is, this is what really your point too, we get caught up in our flesh. It's like it's like we foreclose the idea that the Lord could do something powerfully in our lives if we would just walk in obedience, if we feel called to look after the poor. Well, it's very clear we're called to look after the poor and the orphan from Scripture.
Yeah.
But if we would contemplate having a child in our home but feel in any way ill-equipped or unable, then man, why? Our first place needs to be able to go to the Lord and petition Him in prayer. Father, if this is your will for us, help make it possible.
Yeah.
Equip us in this way, or help us to see that you have got us, so to just jump and go for it. But not to, before we ever begin, analyze it from a fleshly perspective and say, this can't work for this reason and this reason and this reason. Because then, we have the Holy Spirit, but we live like we don't.
Yeah.
And I think this is kind of like what you're saying. There's power. The Lord has power to provide, power to, I don't know.
Well, and He will give you what you need when you need it, right? And so I think so often, in our minds, we try to feel disconnected from the plight of the poor and the orphan and the widowed, and we feel like we're not equipped or whatnot, when the thing is, you just got to take action, right? And I respect my parents so much because they got a call about a single mom who was their friend, who was struggling, and they just went to the hospital, and then God took care of the rest. And so I look at my parents, and I still get I still get teared up, because I think, like, I look at my mom one day and I said, did you ever think when you got that phone call that you would look back 40 years from now and see how God is now? You went from having 0 children and 0 hope of getting pregnant into taking a kid in, and now you have 6 grandchildren. Like, could you have imagined back then what God would do in your life and how He would bring these things, like the things you thought about?
He would multiply it.
That He would multiply it. And now I just think about how, I think about Abraham and how, Abraham tried to do things his way. And God promised that you'll have descendants more numerous than the stars. And God is true and faithful in providing and in His promises. And so I think for us as believers, when you walk out the calling that you're supposed to do, right? We're supposed to do this work, or at least we're supposed to support people who are doing that work. God will take care of the need. Just be obedient, and it will work out. And I know it's scary, but that's where our faith, like, do we truly believe what we say we believe? Mm-hmm. Or do we continue to chase comfort as a convenience to avoiding the hard?
Well, and the reality is too, it is hard. All of it's hard. Everything about fostering is hard. Everything. I mean, from dealing with your own case manager. Anyway, it's all hard. But the thing is, the Lord is so good.
We love our case manager, by the way.
I mean, and we wouldn't trade it.
It's just a lot, right? It's a lot of things, a lot of checking in. It's a lot of inconvenience in your life.
Yes.
But
it's also worth doing.
Yes.
It's fruitful labor.
But what God starts, He will see it through. Mm-hmm. And so my challenge and encouragement, to anybody listening is, where do you see an opportunity for you to step in? And what can you do? And I will always look at my parents as the example to say they did what they could. And it could be something as simple as, like in the movie A Knight's Tale, right? He took his son and he took him to the knight, and he did what he could to get him where he needed to be. And God used that. And my parents, God used them to bring me through. And now looking on the other side, I'm like, wow, they have 6 grandchildren. Our whole family looks like a whole pack of Skittles. You and then you standing next to them, and then me, and people are so confused when they see us all out.
I'm always encouraged when someone just boldly asks, like, are these all your kids? I'm like, yes, they are. Weird. Let me tell you the story. God's so good. I wanted to chime in, just piggyback him with, I wanted to tell you some practical ways that you could help a foster family. We know just from personal experience how blessed we have been as a foster family when someone brings us a meal or even a gift card for a meal. That is a huge, tremendous blessing. We have sweet friends. We have an incredible ministry at our church called 127. It's really a fostering and adoptive ministry. When we get a new placement, they bring us, as they rally the church, they bring us anything we need for the baby that we don't have, basically. So diapers and wipes are always a gift to a foster parent. Formula, if they have a baby, formula is expensive. And, these foster babies do have WIC, but, the WIC doesn't go very far.
No,
and then so you're always covering the extra baby food or formula. And that's just real.
Yeah. Do not do this either. Like, there are people in foster care who do it to make money. But I'm telling you, like, I don't see how they do it. And because if you are providing genuine care for a kid, it will cost you something.
Yes.
But God provides. Yes. Like, He rallies people. And
here, can I finish my list real fast?
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Let me just for practical tips in the event some of you want to get involved, but you don't want to actually have a whole actual another human in your house. Another thing, babysitting for 2 hours so that a foster parent, mom and dad, can go to dinner, or so that foster mom and dad could bring their oldest 2 kids or oldest whomever in their home to spend some time away from foster kids with their bio kids. That's a huge blessing.
Or even one-on-one time with a foster child, like watching the bio kids, however that looks, right? It can look different.
Or to do respite care. Do you know that now they have a rule? We live in the state of Georgia, so now there's a rule that a foster child can, as opposed to a foster animal. Okay, sorry. Human. I don't know what
to clarify, we're not fostering dogs.
Animals, no. Okay, so a foster child can spend 3 nights with an approved caregiver. So that means a friend that I trust can take our sweet baby girl, our foster baby, for 3 nights to give us a break, or to
know who you are.
Or to let us just have time to miss them, or to spend time with our bio kids for a little bit. And then we so gratefully can't wait to see our little foster baby girl when we get her back. But anyway, those are just a couple of things that are very practical and would bless a foster family, where you can get involved but not have to take on a whole other child if you don't feel compelled or able to do that.
And just one quick shout out too to Clement Arts. And one way you could sponsor a foster child and giving to organizations like Clement Art, who provide arts and like ballet, martial arts, knitting, all sorts of art classes that foster parents or adopted parents can take their children to and allow them to experience those things in the community. And it was also Clement Art who, through Clement Care, set up this care team at our church. And so if you're a church and you're here, in and around in Georgia, and you want to know more about how you can set up a care team, we'll have a link in this, I guess in this description. Thank you. You can tell I don't do this often.
I mean, but I'm worse than them.
We'll have a link in the description to these ministries so you can click on and get more information. But even being involved with a ministry like Clement Arts, and Clement Arts has so blessed our family through establishing the care team at our church, to allowing our kids to participate in the arts and activities. And I think it's just really important. It's a beautiful picture of like all these different churches that have just rallied around. And y'all, the foster care community is small. Like, we probably all know each other here in Columbus, and it's the same people. You know what? I wish that would change. And I hope
But I feel like it's larger here in Columbus than it has been anywhere else
we've been. Yeah, at least from, perception.
Yeah.
But I hope that those communities, for you guys that are listening, and I hope for us, that it grows so big where you see constantly new faces from healthy churches in and around your area. And my hope is like Possum Trot, that wherever you are, that there be no foster kid within a 200-mile radius of where you are, because of the impact the church is having on foster and adoptive children in the system today.
Okay, so go out and figure out how to love an orphan. Love on an orphan, look after the widows, care for the poor. And we love y'all.
Be encouraged.
Okay, this is us. We're out. Larry and Christy Young. We'll see you next time. Alrighty, you guys, thanks so much for watching. Please share these videos and like and subscribe to the channel because it helps support the ministry so that we can continue to create content.